The hotel staff who, after we left, had to clear out this hall and reset it for us again this morning, mashallah. So I'd like to express my gratitude to the team for the work they did in getting the venue ready for us this morning. To start proceedings this morning, it gives me great pleasure to invite Qari Muhammad Ar-Rai, who is the Director of Quran Institute. He's also a Professor of Engineering, Quranic Studies and Arabic Studies, currently in the Washington area. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome Qari Muhammad Ar-Rai to open this morning's session with a qira'ah, inshallah. Tafadhal, Shaykh.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألم تر أن الله أنزل من السماء ماءً فأخرجنا به ثمرات مختلفا ألوانها ومن الجبال جدد بيض وحمر مختلف ألوانها وغرابيب سود ومن الناس والدواب والأنعام مختلف ألوانه كذلك إنما يخشى الله من عباده العلماء إن الله عزيز غفور. إن الذين يتلون كتاب الله وأقاموا الصلاة وأنفقوا مما رزقناهم سرا وعلانية يرجون تجارة لن تبور ليوفيهم أجورهم ويزيدهم من فضله إنه غفور شكور. والذي أوحينا إليك من الكتاب هو الحق مصدقا لما بين يديه إن الله بعباده لخبير بصير. ثم أورثنا الكتاب الذين اصطفينا من عبادنا فمنهم ظالم لنفسه ومنهم مقتصد ومنهم سابق بالخيرات بإذن الله ذلك هو الفضل الكبير. جنات عدن يدخلونها يحلون فيها من أساور من ذهب ولؤلؤا ولباسهم فيها حرير. وقالوا الحمد لله الذي أذهب عنا الحزن إن ربنا لغفور شكور. الذي أحلنا دار المقامة من فضله لا يمسنا فيها نصب ولا يمسنا فيها لغوب. صدق الله العظيم.
MashaAllah, Jazakallah Qari Sahib for that beautiful rendition and recitation, and also for the beautiful verses you've selected to read this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, it's with mixed feelings and emotions. I know this is going to be the last day, and I pray inshallah that Allah gives us the opportunity and the strength to see this day through, and gives us an opportunity to have a meeting again very shortly, inshallah. I don't see Dr. Yasser in the room. I think he stepped out. We'll just give him a few minutes. I think he went to the bathroom. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next guest speaker for this session, Professor Dr. Yasser Auda. Is a distinguished Islamic scholar who is focused and a specialist on the Maqasid al-Sharia. He holds many key academic positions globally. He just informed me he returned from my beautiful country a few days ago. He lectures internationally and has authored 25 books in multiple languages. He serves on numerous councils and research forums globally. He is also the president of Maqasid Institute Global, a think tank. Currently he is in Malaysia, visiting professor at the International Islamic University of Malaysia. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Professor Yasser Auda to the podium to address the topic, Reviving the Principles of Maqasid al-Quran in Shaping a Holistic Educational Environment in K-12 Islamic Schools. We are slightly delayed on time. Dr. Auda will speak for about 45 minutes. That will leave us for about 15 minutes for Q&A at the end of that session, inshallah. Dr. Yasser Auda, thank you very much. Anyway, yeah. 40, 45, wherever you're ready. No problem. Then you can stop whenever.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أسعد الخلق وخاتم الرسل محمد صلى الله عليه وآله ورضي الله عن المهاجرين والأنصار ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين ثم أما بعد. Good morning everybody. I'm really honored to be welcome in this very important conference and very important project to link the Islamic schools everywhere and to share ideas and perspectives and experiences. This is a monumental conference, inshallah, that would take our ummah further, inshallah, in the best ways. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless everyone who worked to make this happen and give you tawfiq and barakah. And being someone who is more specialized in Islamic law and Quranic studies, I would have a bit of an accent speaking about education, since it's an area that has its concepts and has its literature and history, but coming from the other perspective of fundamental Islamic studies and Quranic studies and Islamic law, let me try to share some ideas with you, and especially ideas that inshallah eventually I'll talk about a couple experiences where I was involved with Islamic schools back in Canada in making some changes in the curricula and in the approach. So I'm not speaking purely from the educational sciences perspective, neither from the juridical fiqhi perspectives. I'm speaking inshallah in an open way that hopefully comes from the Quranic approach, the Quranic worldview. Let me start by greeting our brothers and sisters in Palestine who are pushing back at the attack on our Muslim ummah. The contemporary emperors are actually attacking our ummah at the heart of the ummah, there in the Holy Land, what is called now Palestine and Lebanon and Jordan. This is new. Like, as someone who comes from that part of the world, this is just a few decades ago, but this area is one area and one people and one tribes and races, and it's not really different countries, but let's go with different countries for now in order to describe something. But our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land, in Palestine, are actually leading the way, in my view, for a major change in the world, a major cycle of civilization. And this has a lot to do with our topic. It's not off topic, because Islamic schools are at the forefront of this cycle of civilization. If we want to bring a cycle of Islam, the glory of Islam and the power of Islam and the model of Islam in today's world, Islamic schools, minority or majority countries, are supposed to play a major role in this. I was happy to see in the brochure and the abstracts and so on a lot of interest in decolonization of curricula and the ways we manage our schools and the way we teach our children. And let me add that desecularization is the most important part of decolonization. It's not just decolonization in the sense of going beyond the Eurocentric approach to curricula and schools and so on. It's more important, in my view, from the Islamic perspective, to go against the secular approach to raising our children. And I'm talking about Islamic schools. You could deal with a secular society, but you don't have to be secular. We could raise the child to know how to deal with the society that is secular, but the child, him or herself, is not supposed to be secular from the inside. You could actually go against the secular system, even though you are accredited by the secular system. The secular system has certain criteria that you can fulfill as an Islamic school, but you could still as a free citizen of any of these countries, especially democratic countries. As a free citizen, you have the right to actually try to change the system and try to better the system. We Muslims are not bringing destruction. We're bringing betterment. We're bringing a better civilization, a better humanity. So what is secular? The issue of secularism has to do with describing things, understanding, conceptualizing based on the material reality, not based on a higher source of knowledge. So al-ilm, or knowledge in Islam, is primarily the revelation that Allah sent to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We do believe that an angel, yes, came to Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam on that mountain and told him, "Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq," and sent with him that book. And that book has the foundation of our education, the foundation of our worldview. This is different from the secular perspective. And as I mentioned, you could be part of a secular system, but you don't have to raise a secular child. The child should still have the Islamic worldview and the Islamic perspective. We need to take a step back and strategize for how we would like to renew our thought and the foundation of our curricula and our approach to Islamic education. Because oftentimes, from noticing, as I said, from the outside, I am noticing that sometimes we apologize too much for the secular system around us, rather than raising children who are unique, who can deal with the secular system and can coexist with the other components of the society, but they themselves are not secular. And oftentimes this happens via maqasid al-sharia. Maqasid al-sharia are the higher purposes of the Islamic jurisprudence. Scholars typically divide them into darurat wa hajiyat wa tahsiniyat, necessities, needs, and luxuries. And the necessities are the preservation of life and intellect and offspring, etc. But this approach is very important for jurisprudence. If you are going to do fiqh, this approach to fiqh at the higher level of al-masalih and al-maqasid, the purposes, the welfare of the people, is very important. But if you're going to do education, this approach is going to lead you to apologism. You are going to go with the same good old secular approach to education, but then you will find something that you call hifz al-nafs. Something has to do with health, and then we say, oh yeah, that is hifz al-nafs. Something has to do with money and managing wealth, even in a ribawi system, and then we say, oh, hifz al-mal. Something has to do with the al-aql, the intellect, even though we are filling our child's mind with secular ideas and positivist science, etc. But we say hifz al-aql. And therefore, what we need is to shift from maqasid al-sharia to maqasid al-Quran. Because maqasid al-Quran are much wider, and they are the basis of Islamic education. When the child, young or small, starts to deal with issues of sharia, issues of jurisprudence, ahkam shar'iyya, rulings here and there, haram and halal, then we can talk about maqasid al-sharia. But the rest of the educational process, we cannot approach it through the maqasid lens, because this is crafted for the juridical theory in Islam, not the educational theory. What is the difference? The difference is that the educational theory is closer to what the Quran is trying to build. Maqasid al-Quran fi bina' al-insan. The Quran is trying to build a human being in a particular way. There is something called taqwa. That is not from maqasid al-sharia, and people in court might not be interested in taqwa. They are interested in rules and regulations. But taqwa is a higher purpose of Islam. And the child, even if they speak English or French or any local language, they have to say it as it is, taqwa. حياء or عفة is actually a Quranic concept. وليستعفف الذين لا يجدون نكاحا فجاءته إحداهما تمشي على استحياء. حياء. That is not equivalent to any English word. It's not shame, and it's not shyness, and it's not politeness. It's حياء. And therefore, this is a maqsood of the Quran, of many of its stories and its similes and its approach to building the human being. When we talk about ibadah is not just worship, it's not just the rituals, it's not just salah and zakah and hajj and umrah, but ibadah in Islam has a much wider concept. And we cannot simply deal with ibadah again in a secular way. And we create a child coming out of an Islamic school who believes that Islam is within the confines of the mosque, who doesn't believe that Islam has something to do with the market, and to be able to critique the riba in the market, which is most of our capitalist transactions anyway, and be able to critique the corruption in politics. Even if he or she lives in a minority country, they have a political role to play as Muslims, because we bring to any system, we bring justice, we bring the welfare of the people, we bring the voice of the oppressed, and we cannot create a child or form a child who believes that what is for Caesar is for Caesar and what is for God is for God. This is a different religion. They have to understand ibadah, not just in the masjid, but also in the market and in the museum and in the play field, and when you do arts and when you do history and when you do language. This is all Islam, and Islam brings a lot to the human being. And when we look at knowledge this way, we need to also strategize how can knowledge be applied to a reality. How can the child understand the reality and describe the reality? It is very important, as I said, to describe a system that is secular, that you don't agree with, but you also live in it, and you live in it fine, and you don't feel a contradiction between living in a system that is not Islamic and bringing Islam to it, because it's your mission, it is your role as a child growing up. Different stages, different minds, obviously, until they are in high school and they have more ability to abstract and to think big. But in all stages, you can live and coexist, but you have to know that this is right and this is wrong. And you have to see the society for its pros and cons from an even a better world than other people who have less roads and highways, in a better world than other people who have less roads and highways and high rises and technology, but they live a more Islamic life. And as I mentioned in the beginning, our brothers and sisters in Palestine are changing the world today because they are changing the model. Here are people who are living now under no electricity, no water, under a hunger siege on them. But we should give them as an example as the most advanced people in the world and the most free people in the world, and the model for what we call in Islam dignity and, taqwa and haya and so forth, and ibadah. It is not a bad model. It is actually the crown in the of the ummah today, these people. And they would allow us to give the examples that are genuinely Islamic in a much better way by doing that. It's also important that we don't confine Islam to a ritualistic window only, but we bring Islam to every aspect of life. And it is important in that regard, when we deal with the Quran, that the child is not just memorizing the Quran. They have to memorize and understand. They cannot just be hafiz. They have to be hafiz and fahim. They have to understand. They cannot just memorize the Quran and then live their world in a very different way from what the Quran is saying. And this means a special focus on the Arabic language. And I'm saying this not because I'm Arab or Ajam. This is because Arabic is the language of Islam. Without the Arabic language, they wouldn't understand what I'm talking about. At-taqwa, wal-haya, wal-ihsan, wal-salah, wal-zakah, wal-rahim. These things are Arabic. And it is essential that even if the child speaks English or French or any other language, that when they speak about these things, they talk in the Islamic terms. They know what zina is, and they describe it this way. They know what fahisha is. There is a difference between fahisha and what they call in the West today LGBTQ and all of these letters. Why? Because fahisha is how you can describe it. Fine, you can deal with the society. You have a neighbor who is like that. You are still good to your neighbor, and you are trying to invite your neighbor, and you have mercy to your neighbor. But you have to describe that what the neighbor is doing is haram. The neighbor drinks. The neighbor does zina, Allah forbid. The neighbor does fahisha. That description cannot fall into a secular worldview where some of our children coming from Islamic schools are absolutely fine with fahisha and with riba and with every sin in the book because the society is like that. No, they should not be fine, and they should feel that they have a role to change that. But they can also live, they can also deal. And it is important then to have an education that revolves around these Quranic purposes, these Quranic maqasid. At-taqwa, one of the experiences that I was personally involved in back in Canada, I say our Sheikh Dr. Abdullah here, Barakallahu fi, and the work that he did with the ISNA school. My own son is a teacher now in Canada. He actually graduated from his school in Toronto, and it was a great job. Across the highway from that school, there are other schools of the Muslim Association of Canada, and we had a program that's called iRise. I was just part of the committee that worked on that. That program had chosen from the Quran certain values and then made the value a theme for the school. And when we started, I told my brothers and sisters, please, no English concepts like service and integrity and no. Arabic concepts from the Quran. Let us start with Rabbaniyah. And then we had camps on Rabbaniyah and workshops on Rabbaniyah and discussions and so forth, different types of discussions, in order for the children of the Islamic schools of the Muslim Association of Canada to actually know what Rabbaniyah is. It has no equivalent in the English language. But then and I have an objective, I have a purpose. وَلَكِنْ كُونُوا رَبَّانِيِّينَ. I have a purpose of that. And we spent the whole camp at the beginning of setting that purpose. How can the children start to think in terms of, I want to be Rabbani? And then we got into taqwa. So, I want to be a muttaqi. Al-haya, I want to have haya. And so forth. And then you have not just the intellectual lectures and so on for people to understand the definition, but also the practice. What are the problems with haya in the society? Now that we know that haya is like that, and how can we deal with these problems? And how can we mold the child's mind so that they are trying to achieve that maqsid of the Quran? Al-Quran, in the stories of the prophets and in the instructions and the rules and with all of its tools, is trying to implant haya in us, and taqwa, and rabbaniyah, and eventually, Allahumma salli ala sadaqah, and rahmah. Rahmah was one of the major themes. How can you understand rahmah? Yes, mercy, you could say mercy, but let us call it rahmah, and let us link it with rahim, and let us understand the Rahman or Rahim, and let us link all the conceptual framework of Islam with the word rahmah, so that when you do rahmah, you know you have something to do with Rahman Rahim subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you have something to do with rahim, and rahim is your relatives, and rahim also is your mother, and so forth. And then you can build the Islamic character this way by tapping into the Quranic knowledge. And you could still be accredited, etc. But you have to do that so that we are not taking the children out of the secular system and raising them to be secular, not knowing what Islam is about and thinking that Islam is about equality and citizenship. And these are all fine, but these are not Islamic concepts. And it's important that they differentiate between the Islamic concepts that are going to shape their mind. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. We are not equal. Whoever is more muttaqi is better in the sight of Allah, which is the most important side. We could be equal as citizens in front of the law. That's different. But we're talking about equality in the sense of everybody being the same. No, we're not the same. Someone that is weak and you don't think that that person has importance, but that person is better than you because they are better in the sight of Allah. For example, as a concept, and these kinds of concepts and these kinds of objectives that we put for the children would make them different from the product of a secular school. Let me also get into a big topic. I don't have time to give a background to it, but basically a shift that we called for. My brother mentioned Maqasid Institute and the work we tried to do at some point. We called for a shift from disciplinary studies into phenomena studies in the Islamic studies realm. It means that we need to go beyond the epistemological confinements of economics and psychology and sociology and all of that, because they are set in ways that are not Islamic. At the basis of psychology, there is either Freud or Maslow or the cognitive school, and all of them are not Islamic and have major Islamic problems. At the basis of your approach to economics, being a capitalist economics, there is a problem there. So if you move the shift, if you shift the education from being about disciplines to being about phenomena, that would make you have a more genuine, a more Quranic approach. One of the experiments, one of the courses at that time offered in the Maqasid Institute a couple years ago was a course on taking primary school children to the forest in order to explore Allah's nature. We called it a journey with nature in light of the Quran. And therefore, you are giving them the same curricula that you are going to cover in the primary school, the same mathematics and alphabet, etc., but in the forest, so that they could see Allah's creation in a different way and they could learn in a different way. Educationally speaking, Finland, in the United States, a few other countries have experiences in that we could refer to, but their phenomena studies or their shift to phenomena studies is rather materialistic, and of course it has objectives of education, serving the markets, citizenship, etc. Our objectives in addition to that are more important. Before serving the market and being a good citizen, inshallah they are all good citizens, etc. Before that, we want al-taqwa, wal-rabbaniyya, wal-iffa, and so on. And therefore, when you take the children out in the reality and then describe the reality with Islamic terms. So for example, when they went out in the forest, umamun amthalukum, they are nations like you. The ants are nations like us, and the birds are nations like us, and the plants. And therefore, that's why it is haram to kill a bird or kill an ant or torture a cat or any of that. I witnessed myself, like some kids in Islamic schools, and they're very cruel to animals. And there are kids in Islamic schools who memorize the Quran and so on, but they are horrible when it comes to animals. And the shaitan, when he said, وَلَا أَمُرَنَّهُمْ فَلَا يُبَتِّكُنَّ آذَانَ الْأَنْعَامِ, the shaitan had asked people to, torture the animals. Like you go back in the tafsir and read that the Arabs used to cut the ear or the nose of the camel and this and that, and like being very cruel to animals. And that is an entry point to being cruel to humans when you are cruel to animals. And therefore, when you teach them umamun amthalukum as a Quranic concept and preserving them not in the environmental science sense, even though it is fine and good and useful, but it's not where we're coming from, in which we are preserving the species for us in order to be able to eat and to have a better climate. But we are preserving the species in Islam for them. They have rights. It is haram to actually hurt them, and it is important to understand their knowledge is higher than our knowledge. And when you see an ant and explain the story of Sulaiman sallallahu alayhi wa Muhammad wasallam, the ant actually understands the reality. يا أيها النمل ادخلوا مساكنكم لا يحطمنكم سليمان وجنوده وهم لا يشعرون. The ant understands this is Sulaiman and this is the army and they are going somewhere. And when we make the child understand, not a toy and is not something you can just step on, it actually understands sometimes more than you, understands the reality. This respect for the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you look at the ducks, back in Canada, the ducks migrating all the way to the Caribbean and back with no GPS, with no roads, this is more advanced than us. This little duck that we think is, silly or stupid is actually more developed. And they use the stars. Now we know from science, they use the stars and they navigate in a very complex way. And if we can present the content of the education, not just the Islamic education, not just having one classroom for Quran and Hadith and Fiqh, and that's it, and the rest is secular, creating a secular student. When we integrate all of this and making sure that we are creating a Muslim, even when they study mathematics and biology, and then when we get to biology, we have to explain Darwinianism, and then we have to critique plus and minus, pros and cons. It cannot be black and white. We cannot continue to simplify their minds, saying, oh, Darwinianism is kufr or it is iman. It's not like that. There are things in the theory of evolution that are acceptable, and Muslim scholars, actually, we have a whole wealth, for example, about evolution, a whole library in the past few decades that we can use. So Muslim scholars, they explained what in evolution is actually true and is actually very Quranic, and what in evolution, if you are going to talk about certain aspects that are against the Islamic theory, we should not make them between stuck in binary classifications between creationism and what was that again, evolutionism. This is not our classification. We are both creationist and evolutionist. Between objectivism and subjectivism, this is not Islamic. Everything is objective and subjective. This is a different paradigm. Between self-identification and social identification, we don't do that. Some stuff we identify for ourselves, and some stuff we make the society identify. But it's not always a self-identification. Otherwise, we are teaching them the basis of sociology, a la Durkheim, a la Hegel. This is not Islamic. So, for example, we tell them that there are things that are naturally like that. You are naturally a boy, and you are naturally a girl. You cannot wake up in the morning and say, I'm a girl. This is against nature. You cannot self-identify like that. This is not how we do in Islam, because there is a criteria, an outside criteria. And then we tell them, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ قَالُوا إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ وَلَكِنْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. They can say muslihun as much as they want, as we see today. Even the Zionist gangs that are butchering children, they are saying they are muslihun. أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ وَلَكِنْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. They are mufsidun. And we teach them that it is going to require more training for our teachers, will require committees that work really hard on curricula. It will require some funding in order to do these activities, in order to add that layer of Islam on top of the secular system, in which instead of in a Catholic school going and doing mass, in the Islamic school they go to the masjid. This is not just what Islamic education is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be in everything. Once the child enters that school, everything has to be Islamic, and every aspect has to be described from the Islamic point of view, and every goal that is defined has to be defined from an Islamic point of view. And it is not right that, as I mentioned in the beginning, we have an Islamic school and we are creating and educating secular children. It is also important that we centralize the Quran. And I go back to this point to finish with it. The Quran is so important for the Islamic character. The way that I noticed Islamic schools, East and West, dealing with the Quran is very Talmudic, if you wish, very biblical, with all due respect. You know, the kids memorize, the kids, they might, stand in Taraweeh and hear. But the Quran is not at the basis of their curricula, the basis of their existence. And many of them memorize big parts or the whole of the Quran, and they don't understand anything about it. Another experience in the Muslim Association of Canada schools, we took that encyclopedia of terms done by our brother Khattab in Toronto, a new translation of the Quran in English, and he's a Torontonian as well. So we agreed with him and we took that encyclopedia in order to teach the kids the terms in the Quran, the concepts of the Quran. So when you go from the beginning to the end, you are going to cover all the Arabic concepts. So even if they don't know Arabic, at least they know the Arabic of the Quran. They know the words that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using to describe. And it is necessary that we have that in order to have a Muslim child. We should not give in minorities or majorities. I know that the attack is very high on what they call now political Islam, this nonsensical term. They are saying political Islam and they are attacking Islamic education at all levels in order to give up the idea of the comprehensiveness of Islam. Of course, political Islam, because Islam is not just a religion in terms of faith. Islam is politics. Islam is economics. Once you say riba, this is economics. Once you say taghut and adl and haqq, this is politics, this tyranny, etc. Once you talk zawaj and talaq, this is society, this is social. Once you talk jihad and so forth, this is war and peace, international relations. Once you mention the nature and umamun amthalukum, this is environment and science, and Islam is everything. Islam should not be allowed by us, by people who are into Islamic education, should not allow others to confine it into a secular definition for their political ends. And we make sure that the children in your specialization in the Islamic schools, or where I personally teach in universities at all levels, we want to make sure that they understand Islam in its comprehensiveness and in its entirety, and have an opinion from an Islamic point of view about every political issue and every economic issue and every environmental issue from the Islamic point of view. And this is not Islamism or political Islam. Of course it is, but it's not just that. It is the nature of Islam. Islam has a comprehensive nature, and the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "In هذا الدين لن ينصره إلا من حاطه من جميع جوانبه." This deen is not going to be given victory except for those who are going to give it victory from all of its side. من جميع جوانبه. I have 30 seconds on the clock here, so I'll use those 30 seconds for dua. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give victory for our brothers and sisters who are oppressed in the Holy Lands. اللهم كن لنا ولا تكن علينا، وانصرنا ولا تنصر علينا، وآثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا، وامكر لنا ولا تمكر علينا. اللهم إنا نجعلك في نحور أعدائنا ونعوذ بك من شرورهم. اللهم فل حدهم، اللهم أدل دولهم، اللهم اكسر شوكتهم، اللهم فرق جمعهم، اللهم انصرنا عليهم. اللهم صل على محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Jazakallah, thank you very much for that wonderful talk and the reminders. Professor Yasser Oda wasn't here for the rest of the conference, but he spoke almost like he heard all of the previous talks and all the previous speakers speak, and reminding us about what many of the other speakers said, that we shouldn't just bolt on Islamic concepts and Islamic verses. We've got to start from the bottom up, start from an Islamic paradigm and build everything on top of that. So thank you very much for those reminders. Someone also reminded us that we need teacher training, and the whole paradigm of how we train teachers needs to also be looked at. So a lot of work set out, and it also connects very well with the theme of the conference, revival rooted in tradition. And Dr. Yasser is reminding us again to go back to our tradition as we move forward, to make sure that we lay those very strong foundations to ensure that we get the kind of child and the kind of individuals with the solid basis and Islamic personality that will leave our institutions, inshallah. Thank you very much for connecting all those dots in all of the previous speakers, mashallah. We have 15 minutes for Q&A, so as we did previously, the sisters could line up here, the brothers could line up there, and we'll allow, we'll take some questions. Go ahead, Sophia, inshallah. Sheikh, you could just respond.
Thank you, Dr. Yasser. That was truly very inspirational. You hit on a lot of points that resonated with us. One of the things that I would like your thoughts on a little bit, we talked, and we do talk, I think, in all of our communities, defining what is an Islamic school. And one of the things is when a child walks in, or anyone walks into that Islamic school, Islam should be everywhere. Now, we have a lot of, and I'm speaking from the US context, and to some degree Canada, we have communities where we do not have the ability to not just attract but find Muslim teachers to teach in our schools. So we have schools or communities where there are non-Muslim teachers, and we do have schools where there are Muslim teachers, but their knowledge of Islam may not be as deep as it needs to be to help for that environment to be all Islamic. Some thoughts on what to do, what can we do in those communities and in those schools where we struggle with that?
Barakallahu feekum. I guess it's a long-term planning kind of thing. It's important that we work as a community in a networked way, so that we prepare our cadres who are going to eventually mentioned my son was in the ISNA school back in Toronto. Now he's a teacher, and therefore the training that he got in the school, the values, he works in the secular system, and therefore he's confined by that. But because of the experience in the ISNA school, wherever he goes, he gathers the Muslim kids. Where is the Muslim prayer room? Where is this? Like, the point is that the training is important to be invested in. It's important that we invest in our teachers. And could there be a non-Muslim teacher? Well, ideally that non-Muslim has to come from an Islamic perspective somehow. And there are people like that, rare. But he or she cannot corrupt the kids. And I'm speaking plainly and frankly. He cannot bring someone with a different value set and then corrupt the children just because we cannot find a Muslim teacher. It's important that we invest in education, in higher education. Higher education from the Islamic point of view. We should have degrees that offer like the qualifications for education. We don't have any, for example, in Canada, we don't have any college that offers to be a teacher. And therefore you have to go through a system that's going to take you through a different value system. And it is possible. The government, as far as I know, is open to this idea in order to qualify teachers. It's important that the groups and the Islamic organizations that open schools have an open mind when it comes to the community. Coming from a background of Islamic movements, I'm not outside that circle. I noticed that Islamic movements sometimes are closed to their members and particular families and particular ways of understanding and practicing Islam, even though there are people outside these circles that are very useful for our projects. And I am noticing that smaller issues, they could be part of Islam, but smaller issues are obstacles here. don't want to give examples because I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty or cause a debate. Or like in one of the schools that I've seen, like one of the best teachers, she lost her job because she insisted on wearing pants, for example. Well, the pants were not tight or anything, just pants. Just she's wearing pants. And our Sheikh, Rahimallah, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, gave a fatwa about that. And we gave fatwas about that decades ago. It's not really, and I tried to intervene and brought the fatwa of Sheikh Yusuf. Ikhwa, yani this is, your Sheikh. He's saying there's no problem. But then you lost a good teacher just because she's a bit different. We are losing a lot of people in the community. South Africa. So we're losing people in the community that are very good for our project over lack of prioritization. And the optics, the brother who was in charge at that time, he told me the optics are not good. I am with you, but the optics are not good. So the optics should not rule the day with Islamic projects, because there are people out there who don't have the exact optics, a brother without a beard, etc. But they are excellent, and they are very Muslim, and they are very qualified. So just, a few notes. وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله. مرحبا أخي.
Hello. Assalamu alaikum. Sheikh, Jazakumullah for a wonderful presentation. There are two things that come to my mind, and I've seen it in my experience with head teachers and other people. They tend to have a victim mentality. At school, they can do so many wonderful things as you are suggesting. They don't do that. They seem to be hidebound by governmental regulations, at one. The second thing is this, it seems from the presentations we've heard for the last few days, and including yours, is the fact that we need a kind of reorientation of our teachers, because what you are really speaking about is like a new trajectory. So in this reorientation program, what are some of the things that you feel we should emphasize? Jazakumullah.
Barakallahu feekum. In terms of government regulations, it's possible to abide by the government regulations, but also do what you like in the school. It takes creativity. Government is not telling you how to breathe and how to teach anything. They are about outcomes. Speaking from experience in universities, not in schools, but going through accreditation of universities in different countries, the accreditation is not really at the end controlling the classroom 100%. It's up to you how to do that. How to do reorientation. My advice is to centralize the Quran and the Quranic worldview. The Quran, not just the tilawah and the tajweed, but the Quranic worldview. The Quran is a wealth of information. And because of a long story in fiqh and the debate between different trends and so on, it has been marginalized from our thinking as an ummah. But we're not asking the teachers to give fatwa. We're asking the teachers to understand the Quran and its paradigm, its worldview. And we can repeat over and over that we're teaching you the Quran not to give fatwa, not to speak on legal issues. Leave this for the fuqaha. But we are actually giving you the Islamic original worldview. From Alif Lam Mim, Dhalika al-Kitab, all the way. This is a lot of information, and we want them to think about it, and we want them to study it, and just centralize the Quran. My quick answer, inshallah. My sister, and then my brother, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Jasir, that was exceptional, mashallah, tabarakallah, Allah barak feek. I have something that I'd like you to elaborate on. In your presentation, you talked about, the context of higher education, as well as at primary, secondary levels of education, in terms of how we teach Islamic education. Could you elaborate on the need, the dire need, for schools to actually collaborate with universities, academic colleagues who are working in the field of Islamic education systems, so that we can create that continuum.
Yeah.
Establish the foundation and create the continuum. So academic scholars who are specializing in teacher education, professional learning, and have a vision of developing higher education learning that is going to facilitate teacher education for Muslim teachers and non-Muslim teachers as well, by the way.
Sure.
Just thank you.
Jazakallah khair. This is very important because we need to simplify the material for our children in the school. But we do not need to simplify the curriculum and the plan and the strategy. The strategy has to be very complex. It happens to me sometimes as an academic, I go to a school, I advise on issues, and then my brothers and sisters say, oh, that's too complex. This approach to Islamic history, for example, is very complex, and we need to simplify it. These are 15-year-old, 10-year-old. I say, yes, the plan is complex. And then when we deliver, you have to translate the complexity of the plan into something deliverably. So my sister is mentioning academics and their role. They are important because they give you the strategy, they give you the higher ideas. And this is how the system works, the system of education anywhere in the world. The higher ideas, the basic science, the philosophy, and so on. And then as a teacher, perhaps there could be a committee that simplifies these ideas to the curriculum. So I agree with you, my sister, my brother. I'll be brief, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, ya Sheikh. Raising this child require multiple stakeholders. What I would say, the ecosystem. My inquiry is that from your maqasid Quranic perspective, gluing all the stakeholders, is the parents, is schools and communities and everyone that is going to raise these children, what kind of narrative that can glue everyone to make sure that we deliver the end game of this generation that we are trying to raise?
Barakallahu fi. I believe it's the narrative of Islam, the original narrative of Islam, that Islam is a da'wah for humanity, is a call for people to save themselves from hellfire, is to go back to the roots, the call for tawheed and the call for da'wah. I think da'wah is very important to project as our narrative. When we do schools, we are actually concerned about da'wah. We should not isolate ourselves from the rest of the society. And I think that narrative is important, despite the fact that the rest of the society could be sensitive about calling them, proselytizing them, we should not be sensitive about that. I think da'wah is important. And da'wah is contagious. Like if we have a core group that believes in da'wah, it will widen the circles and more people will believe in da'wah. It's a rare thing now, but I think it's important. Da'wah till Islam. So, my sister.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I'm coming from the U.S. context, and I think it's really important to think about not only the paradigm shift for teachers, but we don't have the language. For years, 50 years in Islamic education in the States, we've not used the Arabic language much, maybe not at all. We're teaching a very, very elementary Arabic textbook that somebody likes more than another textbook, but no comprehensive, what exactly we're teaching the children. So the teachers come from all the places that they come from without any given plan to really put Arabic at the forefront of what we're doing to understand. We're trying now to get them to use the months of the year. How basic is that after so many years?
Well, Arabs, majority Arab countries are really not interested in the Arabic language cause. They're not interested in Palestine. They're not
so it's not
in
just us.
So we should not rely on them. It is you who should realize the importance of the Arabic language and not rely on what the Arabs do. The Arabs now, relatives back in the Arab world, the kids speak English better than Arabic. Now that's the new Arab world that they are making in the Middle East. So we in the West, we should teach the language. I migrated to Canada maybe 35 years ago. In the first classroom in the university, I didn't understand a word. I did not have English. I just passed those exams.
Yeah.
I didn't know the language. And then over the years, I learned it until now I'm speaking to you in it. So Arabic is possible to learn, and it's very systematic. And there are very good books and very good ways, many. But then we have to focus on it. We have to say that the kid has to know English, for example, in the United States, and Arabic. And they have to have good knowledge of Arabic. It is possible. You cannot be coming out of a Jewish school and you don't know Hebrew. Then you're not a proper Jewish boy. Like this is, and they are advanced in this. The kids know Hebrew. It's not, and Hebrew is a much more ancient language. Of course, Arabic is the mother, the grandmother of Hebrew. But I'm saying that it is more difficult, has less vocab. Arabic is, so I can't stress more the importance of teaching Arabic and learning Arabic and investing in this. Allah.
Thank you so much.
Allah. Final question, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Yasser, very much. I enjoyed your speech a lot. Just it is like a question or maybe a proposal that when we talk about Islamic or we talk about Quranic, it is actually very wide perspective. Look at this whole here. Every one of us translate or interpret Islamic or Quranic in the way we dress. So you can see the variety of interpretation. But when we come in education, actually, education, it is an organized system. So my question is it possible that we, under the Global Association of Islamic Schools, create a manual for the Islamic schools or for Muslim schools? In that manual, there are details, at least for the basic things, how the teacher should, what values teacher should have, what is the uniform of the teacher, what is the uniform of the students, because I have seen in secular world that there are manuals, like for school director, what he should do to achieve the objectives of the school. Even in universities, you know, they have pictures of students wearing the uniform, how the uniform should look like. So is it possible, because when we talk about Islamic and Quranic, every one of us will go back and we will interpret it based on our own understanding.
Yes,
thank you very much.
It's, I have 0 minutes here, but it's just, it is possible, but for the manual to be high level, not to get into the diversity of Muslims. MashaAllah, as Muslims, we're very diverse, but Islam is not many Islams. The cultures are different. We, you know, as you said, we dress differently, but we all cover our auras, for example. So to have high level manual that focuses on the principles and the objectives and the values, the core values, at-taqwa, etc., are not different. Inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
The two gentlemen that were there, we'll take your 2 questions, inshallah. The 2 gentlemen that were there, we'll take that and then we'll close. Inshallah.
Okay, brother, sorry, just to ask a question. There is a perception that secular education, Islamic education, look like opposing and conflictual. And for a child to grow up in a particular environment where he acquires a certain Islamic education but living in a secular world, or somebody getting a secular education and living in Islamic world, generates some kind of confusion. What strategy would you propose to prepare the mindset of a child to live in this kind of opposing, conflictual dimension?
Barakallah feek. Well, in my view, the strategy is to know that secularism is not neutral. Secularism is a religion. Secularism is not a common ground. Are they conflictual? Yes. Islam is a different religion from secularism. But also to know that you are going to grow as Muslim, but you are going to be able to live in a secular society. I started the lecture by saying that there is a difference between creating a secular child and creating a Muslim child who can live in a secular society, can deal with the secular people and the secular issues and the laws that are different from Islam and whatever it is. So my advice for strategy is to is to focus on Islam as an identity and to define secularism as in the material world and the separation of religion from life, as in these definitions, to define them properly so that our kids grow up knowing that they are Muslim and that they reject the secular worldview, but they can live in it. And that's what I think. I don't think that we should dilute Islam or water down what Islam is about in order for them to survive in a secular society. And I know that secular societies, I live in the West, are becoming very vicious about things that it's none of their business. They want the rest of the society to believe in what they believe. Some people are like that, and this voice, the far right they call it, is becoming higher and higher. But we should hold our grounds. This is our identity, our deen. We should not change Islam into a different religion to accommodate that. Allah alam. Yeah. So my brother, final question.
Which school is called Islamic school run by Muslim organization? What is the criteria and term that we call Muslim school?
Okay.
Is there any Islamic school model which we can follow and we learn from there? This is called Islamic school.
Well, mashallah, I think everyone here is involved in Islamic education. You can learn from everyone. And I don't know of any ideal university that is Islamic or college that is Islamic or school that's Islamic. There is nothing ideal, my brother, but you could learn. You have a criteria, which is what Islam is about. Some people are closer in something, you can learn from their experiences. I don't know, maybe my brother, maybe it could create some index. I am against the idea, by the way, of creating an index and giving prices and all of that, because there is a lot of problems with such, having a criteria. And people tend to just checkmark the criteria rather than going into the depth. So I don't advise creating an index or something, but inshallah we learn from each other, inshallah.
Can I say something? Dr. Yasser.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in showing our appreciation to Dr. Yasser.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's just on 10:15, we'll take the 25-minute break that has been scheduled. That means we'll arrive back here at 10:40 for the start of the next session. Thank you very much. 10:40 for the start of the next session.